Hi, I'm Doreen Barnes, and welcome to Reader's Corner. My guest today is author Barry P. Hall, and he has written a book that is called The Wages of War, which is actually a sequel to his first book, which is The Ghost from the Holocaust. So welcome to the program, Barry.
Thank you.
And please tell us what is the storyline of Wages of War?
Well, basically, to me, the wages of war, the only wage that anybody gets out of war is what they used to call shell shock, PTSD.
Yes.
Otherwise, you get really nothing much out of war. Nobody ever wins. So the storyline in the book is that it's about a bunch of a squad of ex-military that have come back. They had stormed the beach on D-Day, Juno Beach.
Yes.
And of course they got cut up pretty badly, and through the war the squad got replenished and that sort of thing. And when they get back to Canada here, they gather the squad together in Toronto, and they have trouble getting or keeping jobs. Mm-hmm. And so in desperation they rob an armored car.
So Barry, is it because of their PSTD that they have problems keeping a job?
Right.
And okay, thank you.
That's right.
Sorry.
And they plan it well, and of course they got a lot of military experience.
Yes.
And so they rob the armored car, and some of them get killed at the
scene, eh?
At the scene. Mm. And others get captured as they're trying to get away. But basically the whole story is about the one guy that gets away with the loot. Mm-hmm. He's got all the loot, and in desperation he decides that he's going to go into hiding and not spend the loot, but go into hiding. And it just happens that he comes from way up north, where there isn't any roads. Well, there might have been logging roads but no real roads in, and that's a town called Chapleau, which is somewhere about halfway between Timmins and Wawa or Sault Ste. Marie in there.
So it does exist?
Oh, it exists, and it was a hub of railroad back then.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, it had, and it still is basically a very heavy railroad town and logging town. There's a couple of sawmills still there. Mm-hmm. Not much else. There's about 1,500 people still live in there. But anyway, he gets to Sudbury, catches the train, goes home to Chapleau, and he figures nobody will ever find him there. Oh. So he goes to Earth in at his parents' old premises out on the lake. Mm-hmm. And it's basically his story, how he survives and the things that are happening to him and in his life. And it takes my sleuths from the first book, The Ghost of the Holocaust, and brings them, because they're operating in the mid-50s, as you know, from the first book. Mm-hmm. And he is there in 47, and it brings the story together, and it jumps back and forth from him up at Chapleau and them basically around Peterborough.
So would you say it's a story within a story?
More or less,
yeah.
More or less.
Mm-hmm.
The theme of the books all the way along are centered around harness racing.
Yes.
Because my hero, you might say, as far as a writer is concerned, was Dick Francis. Mm-hmm. And of course, he wrote about racing, horse racing. But that was steeplechase, and we don't have steeplechase here in Canada, so I picked harness racing. Mm-hmm. And I picked Peterborough in particular because it's off the beaten path a wee bit.
What's it called? Peterborough Downs? Is that what it was called?
Flamborough, it's not Flamborough, I'm sorry, wrong. Mm. It's called Kawartha Downs now,
Kawartha,
but back then, in the mid-50s, they raced at downtown Peterborough. I can't think of the name of the track off the top of my head. Mm-hmm. But the track is still there where they used to race.
Okay.
I glorified it way beyond what the track actually did. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Morrow Park, that's what I was trying to think of. Morrow Park still exists. So Peterborough Petes play their hockey games at the arena, which is beside Morrow Park.
Okay.
And Morrow Park never had racing the way I described it in there, but I sort of melded together, you might say, Toronto, Ottawa, and the other harness racing tracks and put that together.
And why not?
Yeah.
It's your book.
That's right. It's fiction.
It's fiction.
It's fiction. Yeah.
So Barry, when you're saying harness racing, are we talking like Selkie
Yes, that's
type
right.
of racing?
Yeah,
Okay.
where the driver is actually sitting in a little
In a cart.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I just wanted to make sure I understood.
Yeah, well,
fully.
it's kind of a specialized racing, you might say, because what they call here in Canada flat racing with the jockey up in the back of the horse,
Yes.
there isn't any steeplechase where he's going over hurdles or anything
Right.
like that, like Dick Francis had. But there's still a lot of opportunity in the harness or any racing game or any gambling game, really, because that's what it is, really.
Scam. Yes. You bet on a horse.
You know, and there's so many things that
Happen?
you can
Go
do.
on.
Yeah. So many opportunities for crime, I guess. So
is there a little bit of crime then in this book?
there is, yeah,
Okay.
of course, yeah. Yeah. And,
Along with the racing.
yeah,
and the betting.
And the betting, yeah, and it's got a kind of a secondary theme. My two books, and there are three others that I planned originally. Whether I ever write them or not is something else again. But it was planned as a 5-series group,
Oh, really?
and the storyboards, I guess you'd call them,
Yes.
for those. I've already got them all lined up, and I know what is supposed to go in each book. I haven't got down to the nitty-gritty, but that's the way it is. And for the most part, the harness racing in there is ongoing through the books, and it's the people, the sleuths really, from the first book that go all the way through it. And
But it's a standalone too, is it not, Barry?
oh yes,
Like-
quite so. Yeah.
Oh, yes, because when I read it, I found, I didn't
Yeah.
need to know what happened
No,
before
you
that
don't.
because it is a standalone and it's bringing in more adventures that these people
Yeah,
went through.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
But, as far as the Morrow Park is concerned, it closed up in about 1961 in Peterborough. And they opened up the Kawartha Downs, which is really closer to
Okay.
Fraserville,
Yes.
I guess. It's down the Fraserville Road now, and it's still there. And I go there 2 or 3 times a summer and take my books. And I have quite a following there, and they sell the books for me there too.
Very
Yeah.
good. That's nice.
They seem to appreciate that, it helps advertise their racing and that kind of thing.
So have you attended races and actually placed a bet?
Oh yes, I guess I've done. That's where my knowledge, I suppose, comes from. Is what they call improving the breed.
Oh, okay.
Betting on the horses, and
Yes.
and they take out a certain portion, about 20%, I think, perhaps a little less, out of the race to pay for the purses that the horses race for. And yes, I've done that quite a bit, but in my younger days, and I've had some successes and some failures.
We all do, right?
Yeah, it's
what
like
betting is.
it's just a different form of gambling, like a casino and that sort of thing.
Yes.
The casino's not in the business of giving you money.
Not really.
They're in the business of making money for themselves. And it's the same with horse racing, really.
They're providing an experience.
Sure.
Really, that's what they're doing.
Entertainment, yeah.
Yes, yes. If you win, you win. If you don't,
Yeah,
you don't.
that's right. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So the individuals that were in your first book, you've brought forward to this
yeah.
this book, and the main character, Richie, I found a very likable guy.
Yeah, thank you.
So describe
Well,
Richie to our viewers.
Richie was a member of the Queen's Own Rifles originally, who went ashore on D-Day at Juno Beach, and he's one of the survivors that came through it. Went through the war, comes back, and he perhaps is not so badly off PTSD-wise as
Mm-hmm.
some of them.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the guy that gets away and goes to Chapleau. And he's a survivor type. Back then, Chapleau was a very, what would you say, basic town, primitive town perhaps.
Yes. Yes.
There wasn't as much in the way of facilities there at the time. And so he goes out and he survives basically in the wilderness. He marries his childhood sweetheart, and they have some children and that kind of thing. And
Mm-hmm.
in the end,
Oh, don't tell us the ending now.
No.
Now, Barry.
Okay.
Don't be doing that now. We
But-
want people to read about Richie
Yes,
and his
well-
family.
yeah, he leads a very interesting life, I guess, out in the woods.
Yes.
And basically how they get together is that the sleuths and whatnot are sportsman people, and they fly up there. They're all ex-Army Air Force pilots, and they fly up there to go fishing, as a
Yes.
lot of people did then and still do now, fly into, the northern spots
Exactly.
for the good fishing.
Yes.
And so they meet Richie up there.
Uh-huh.
And
Is it just by chance that they meet Richie?
not so much. They do have an idea. They were told who they might find for a guide, and so
Yes.
they search him out as a guide.
Okay.
And that's
Then
they
that's
get
how
together.
they find out with
Yeah, that's
with
how they
Richie.
get together. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as I said, I like Richie. Yeah. He's got a conscience, doesn't he?
Yes, he does. And
Mm-hmm.
in the end, I guess it comes through.
Good. Don't you be telling the ending
Okay.
now. Okay. So let's take a break right now.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So please stay with us. We're coming right back with more from author Barry P. Hall. Welcome back. I'm talking with author Barry P. Hall about his book, his actually second book, Wages of War, which is a sequel to The Ghost from the Holocaust. So, Barry, let's continue our little chat here. Let's talk about planes, because you bring planes into the book. How much do you know about planes?
Well, I was in the Air Force
Uh-huh.
for 6 years, and I wasn't a pilot, but I was airborne. I
Yes.
was electronics officer, radio officer, they called them back in those days. And I was never in a war or anything. I was in Cold War times. And so I have 4,000 hours of flying time, which is a fair bit of flying time, but it was all as, an electronics officer kind of
Yes,
thing. I've
yes.
started 2 or 3 times to learn to be a pilot. And I left the Air Force a little bit too soon. I got out 2 years before it was amalgamated into one force. And when that happened, our ranks, they took the radio officer basically away and gave that to sergeants. We were commissioned officers
Yes.
at the time I was in. And the commissioned officers that had that job were then retrained to pilots.
Oh, wow.
And so if I'd have stayed in a couple more
You
years,
would have been a pilot.
I would have got there, yeah. But
You still learned a lot, though, because you were
yeah.
around them.
Oh, yeah.
You were with the
Oh, yeah.
pilots. You were with the crew.
yeah,
And so you would have learned about the planes. And the reason I ask is because it's one of the
Yeah.
it's quite prominent in the book. I mean, they're
Yeah.
flying back and forth from
Yeah.
Chapleau,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And they're going fishing, and they're flying down east. They're flying everywhere. So
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you.
well, yeah, the 2 of the 3 main people are ex-pilots, one of which, the main one in my opinion, is me, of course.
Yes.
But he was shot down over Germany and spent the latter part of the war in a prison camp. The third guy, which we haven't talked about at all, well, second and third, George wasn't a pilot. He was Army, and the other guy was a pilot who fought in the Battle of Britain and that kind of thing. He was a Spitfire pilot.
Yes.
And so he's the main pilot for our sleuth group here. And Robert. And anyway, through the books, George decides to become a pilot too.
Yes,
so
yes.
that was the third guy in the group.
Yeah, but they're all what I liked about the group too is they're church goers.
Oh yes.
They sit down for their Sunday meal. They
Yeah.
always have a nice Sunday meal.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow,
Yeah.
I like that.
Well, I'm a churchgoer myself, and God's been very good to me. And so I tried to project that a wee bit into the book and that kind of thing. And you might say that's another part of the book. When you're sitting down to try and decide what you're going to write about, right away you have to figure what your main theme is, what your primary audience that you're looking to go after. My primary audience was the racing scene because of my like of Dick France's books. Yes. But then I thought that I liked the religious bent a little bit as well, and mystery stories. And well, of course, Dick Francis is all mystery stories, centered around a lot of the crimes that happened in racing, and so it gives you a broad spectrum to attack, and lots of things that you can bring into the story. Kind of thing.
What I also found, Barry, was that you brought back memories for myself as well, talking about the dinner scenes that you had in there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what you did. You went to church on Sunday, you came home, you sat down as a family. Sometimes the minister would come to dinner as well.
That's right.
And you would have a family meal.
Sure, and it's not so much today as it used to be back in our day. In our day, that's what you did, and you did that for most of the Sunday, and it didn't really matter what denomination or religion you were. You had a Sunday dinner, and quite often it would be a cold dinner because you weren't allowed to work on Sunday, so there wouldn't be.
You prepared on Saturday for Sunday.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was a family day.
Yeah, and it was the one day of the week that everybody sat down and got together, kind of thing.
Yes. So. Also, a little bit of entanglement with Marie, right? Because she was married, right? And when Richie went back, he sought out his love of his life, but there was this obstacle that was there.
Well, it gets a little bit complicated. Richie, of course, in the war, he gets wounded badly, and his Marie, his childhood sweetheart, thinks he's been killed, and so the town bully more or less rapes her, and he marries her. He does the right thing, you might say, but he marries her, but he's very abusive. And when Richie gets back home, he sees that abuse, so he takes her away from that. And anyway, she goes back with him and lives with him for a while, and then later on, she gets a divorce and they get married.
But you didn't stay right in Ontario, did you? You actually went down east.
Well, yeah. The eastern side of it, you see, is part of my Air Force experience too.
Okay.
Being in Maritime Command and chasing submarines all over the Atlantic for 5 years, I was stationed in Prince Edward Island. And my ex is from Prince Edward Island. And so I know a really decent amount about Prince Edward Island too. I mean, I'm not like as if I'm a native or anything like that. Prince Edward Island is kind of isolationist in a way, because for years you had to get across there by a ferry. You couldn't get across by a bridge like you can now.
Right.
And so I thought I'd like to tie that in as a secondary subplot, go to Prince Edward Island. and have our guys doing deep sea fishing, and as well as their fishing up north.
So are you going to carry that over into your next book? Are we going back to PEI?
Yes, we are.
Okay, okay.
I originally thought I'd do it early in the third book.
Yes.
I've written, well, as you know from the back of here, there's a couple of chapters in the back to get you kind of going into the third book. And I got part of that done, maybe 4 chapters or so, but then I had a heart attack about a year and a half ago, and that kind of sidelined what I was going to do. But yeah, they were going to go back and revisit Prince Edward Island and bring their friends from there up here for the hunting season, because Prince Edward Island, their hunting season consists more of Canada geese than anything else.
Yes.
Because they don't have deer there any longer. Well, I mean, there might be some deer, the odd deer there, but not very many or anything like that. So there's not what you'd call a deer hunting season or anything like that. And the people that I know, my ex's relatives, and I know them all pretty well, they go hunting, or at least a couple of them do, but they go over to New Brunswick to hunt.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it's more of a wooded area. It's,
yeah.
You know, so
yeah,
it's,
better
it's,
chance of
getting what they want.
But they're very ardent fishermen, or the one that I'm particularly thinking of. The rest of the brothers and sisters aren't so much, but the one guy, Randy, is, and so you know, he goes all over the place.
So as you told us, you do have storyboards for 3 more
Yes, I
books. And so are we going to see the third one in the next little while?
I don't know. I'm getting old and tired, I guess. But yeah, it also got, not only the heart attack kind of slowed me
Yes.
up. I had prostate cancer too, and although that didn't do much in the way of physical depletion of your physical resources or anything like that, but it slowed me up in the writing.
Yes.
And then real life crime came along and sort of usurped my plot for the third book. The third book is basically about a nursing home where the older people are dying off. Well, nursing home people do die off.
Yes.
And in the book, basically, it's about the older people being killed off. And of course, in real life, you had that nurse down in Woodstock or wherever it was.
Yes.
And we don't know what her motive was for killing off the older people. The motive in my book is going to be greed, which is a motive for
a lot of things,
a lot of things, right?
Yes.
There's an awful lot of greed in life today, too. So, you know, basically the North American culture has been swung over to where if you're not into greed, you're not into, you know, you're not part of the culture of North America these days.
Right, right.
You know, there's very few people that are satisfied with what they have. They all want more. So.
Yes, unfortunately. We
Yeah.
want, don't we?
Yeah.
We don't need, though.
But I thought that would be a good theme for the third book. The fourth one is more into drugs. When I get that far, or if I ever do get that far, it's into the drug culture of the 60s, and there was drug culture there too.
Yes, there was.
And then the fifth one, if I ever get to it, is basically switching the series from mystery story, harness racing,
Yes.
to science fiction.
Oh, really?
In a minor way.
That's very interesting.
In a
I
minor
like
way,
that.
because it's
Oh.
not science fiction or fantasy as the big thing these days, fantasy, not science fiction. It's not so much that, it's more or less something that could happen.
Yes.
It's basically a story about a meteorite that slams into Earth
Whoa.
and finishes off the Earth culture that we have today and dumps us back. I'm going to have a professor from University of Ottawa as one of the leads, and he is a friend of the main character in the books.
Oh, so these are all coming forward then, aren't they?
And he lives in Smith Falls.
Whoa!
And
Close by.
Yeah, close by. And so he invents basically a machine. It doesn't turn out to be a time machine, but a machine that can go between parallel worlds. That's been written about many, many times.
Yes.
Parallel
Yes.
worlds.
Yes.
And so I'm going to have them escape from this Earth to that,
Earth.
which will
Very-
basically be the same.
Thank you for sitting down with me today. Where can people actually obtain your book?
Well, I don't have them in much in the way of libraries or anything like that. I have had, but I usually go to craft sales. That's where I sell my books
Yes.
mainly now. I have a website that will tell you, or is supposed to tell you, where I am with crafts. And it's www.barryphall.com. So it's not very hard
So
to...
they can contact you.
They can
talk
either
to you,
contact
yes?
me, or
Uh-huh.
on the website will be where I will be next with my craft sales.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and they can come there.
Thank you for
Thank you.
writing this.
Well, thank you for having me on here. I've had a good time with it. Thank you very much.
And that's it. Till next time, I'm Doreen Barnes.